everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Winging It podcast. Today, we are going to be launching ourselves into a whole new race series for this pod. Normally, we're a Formula One based podcast, but today, there's just two of us, Nigel and Freddie, and we're going to be talking about Formula E. Nigel, how are you?
I'm very well. Yeah, good to be doing a Formula One. We did do one like very, very early on and didn't do anything after that. So it's been 2.5 years, but we're back. Hopefully, if we continue doing the podcast this year, it won't be another 2.5 year spell, but we'll have to see how busy we are, obviously. But yeah, good to be doing it. We said there was a 75% chance. It's now 100% because we're recording it.
We're actually doing it, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Formula E is at an interesting point in its development, in its generations, in its life. They're about to enter Gen 3, which will be the third evolution of Formula E as a race series, in the way that they correspond with electric cars. They develop the car as it goes, but I'm sure if you're listening to this, you know that. We've just come off the back of quite a successful Gen 2 concept from the car side. The extended battery that they had for following the first gen car went down a treat. No car swaps, 45-minute races, regen working really nicely, and Formula E have built on that. They've got cars that have more efficient motors, have more regenerative energy. They have a lot more speed inherently inside them if they've got a fast enough tire, and it looks like it is a step forward in terms of overall stats for Formula E. But there are some caveats that have been in the news quite a lot about this car and about the readiness of Formula E to go racing in Mexico in mid-January. And having only had one Valencia preseason test with a few question marks over it from a lot of drivers and a lot of teams, Formula E is entering Gen 3 in a much more restrained and quiet state than they did enter Gen 2 in end of 2018. So that's what we're going to touch on today. We're going to talk about where Formula E is at with Gen 3, what we think is going to happen, how sort of, to be honest, to set the tone, how sort of tentative and worried we are for a race series both of us really genuinely love. It seems to be even more unpopular to like Formula E at the moment, despite the developments, despite the progress it's made. So Nigel and I fly the flag, and we'll continue to do so, but probably quite critically today. And then, of course, with the second half of the pod, we'll talk about competition, we'll talk about predictions for the year, and we'll talk about what we think from racing from Gen 3. But first, we should really talk about where Gen 3 is at. So, Nigel, we're going to start easy. First impression of Gen 3 car when it was launched?
When it was launched, I wasn't really a fan, to be honest. I didn't really like the shape of it. It was launched back in, was it Monaco? Was it? I can't remember.
Yeah, Monaco, end of April, start of May, they launched their first studio concept.
Yeah. So on first impression, I just didn't really like it. But as the months kind of went on, I quite like it now. I'm luckily to be at Valencia, thanks to Total Motorsport for sending me out there, and one of the few journalists. And I saw it on track, and I quite liked it. From like a fan perspective or aesthetic perspective, let's say. It's meant to be lighter, it's meant to be faster, it's meant to be more efficient, more power. It is certainly free of those things, power, efficiency, lighter. It's the speed or the overall lap time, which has brought a lot of questions, because I think Jamie Regal, the former CEO, he said that the cars will be at multiple seconds faster. I think the general expectation was at Valencia they'll be about 3 seconds faster. That wasn't the case. It was just about half a second. Was Maximilian Gunter, who was the fastest in Valencia. He was half a second faster than last year's Gen 2 time, which is a big surprise. And there's the possibility, I think, from what the drivers have told me, that the car could even be slower than the Gen 2 car at some of the street tracks, especially if it's cold, because the problem they're finding is in the corners, there's not a lot of grip, and that's mainly because of the tyres. They got a new tyre manufacturer this year, Hankook coming in, replacing Michelin. The drivers requested, or the FIA requested, to have a hard tyre. That's what they've got. But some drivers like it, the ones who are faster, and the ones who are struggling don't really like it. So that's the position we're kind of in terms of speed. But to answer your question, I've liked the Gen 3 car more and more, but the drivers, there's definitely mixed feelings.
Yeah, I agree. When it was launched, I did think it's a bit sort of the wrong type of boxy. It was just sort of an arrowhead. But the more you look at it, and the more you look at it with liveries, with some of the nice liveries as well, like the McLaren and the Maserati, I think, and the Nissan, I think look very nice. I think there's a few hit and miss liveries on the grid, but I know you're not the biggest fan of livery chap, but even you probably like the Neo. But they make them look a bit more Imperial Star Destroyer than top of a spear. But I completely agree with what you're saying, and sort of the mixed reactions. The hard tire came from criticisms, but also sort of an unknown fact about the Gen 2 Michelin all-terrain tire they had, which was that it was quite a soft tire, but it would be rinsed by the end of a race. And with the way Formula E works with sustainability and so on, they would only bring 6 tires to a double header round, and they'd have to sub out the tires throughout the weekend. And there wasn't much sort of they could do with tires in the race. And obviously with the duals format, there was much more, for particularly the top teams, much more energy going into the tires at particular points, because they were running at even higher kilowattage. And so there was a lot of energy going into the tires. And by the time they get to the end of the race, those tires would be pretty shredded. And we saw that very obviously in New York, where there was a massive, essentially thunderstorm at the end of the race. Drivers were trying to find any grip, and basically the top 5 all sort of spun off into the same runoff area at turn 5 or 6 in Brooklyn, a track we're not going back to this year, but that's for reasons of the dockyard. But it was criticized quite a lot back then, and understandably a more durable tire is the necessary way to go. And Hankook have just come in, so we can't really dunk on them too much for their first tire being a harder tire. It's what you would expect. You don't want to go soft too early, but this tire will develop throughout the year and will develop throughout the next 4 years, as Hankook have the tender. So I think as concerns go, it's not the biggest concern, and a little bit of me is slightly okay with them being a similar speed, because I think what did help Gen 2 on the tracks that Formula E race at was that the braking zones were still, good enough for them to send a move, but also good enough for it to be quite close to the wall in a quali lap. So I do think there are elements of it that do help the early racing for Gen 3, in something that I was originally going to be quite critical of if they had a much faster car on street tracks.
Yeah, I agree. I think the actual racing, depending on if to get the lap count right, because it's no longer 45 minutes plus 1 lap. It's going to be a lap count. Not quite. I don't think anyone is sure how long exactly each EP is going to be. So that'll be interesting. But if to get that right, the FIA, I think the racing will be very good, because the opening laps, everyone is going to be really struggling. You'll see the cars sliding a lot. And the drivers are saying they can slide, but still push on. The tyre can last over a week, Lucas de Grassi said. So, if anything, from a fan's point of view, it's going to make it more exciting, if anything. I think in qualifying, what we're going to see in the group part of qualifying before the duels, the drivers will just stay out and just do multiple laps just to get temperature in the tyre, whereas last year they would do 2 runs, 1 in the first 5 minutes and 1 in the final few minutes. But I think this year we're just going to see them stay out, because to get temperature, if they do go to a cold track, Mexico shouldn't really be a problem, I don't think, but other tracks will be, like Berlin, for example.
Riyadh.
We're going to see a big difference there. Yeah, Riyadh at night.
Yeah, Riyadh at night. I think Rome is actually a lot late. Is in the summer now. So
July.
Rome,
God.
So that's going to be interesting. But I think Riyadh, I think we've got a few unknowns with Cape Town and Hyderabad. But other than that, I think we do know where we're at with a lot of the tracks in that regard. But let's get to the thorny point. Gen 3 hasn't had the cleanest start. Could you sort of outline the criticisms of Gen 3?
Well, first of all, even before Valencia, there were a lot of crashes because the because the brakes probably have got a new braking system for this season. I believe they're trying to combat this by adding what's it called to the rear. What's it called,
Adding
Freddie?
a sort of a supplementary brake, a
Yeah, to the
mechanical
rear.
system to the back of the car, as opposed to the electric regenerative braking they have at the front and the back of the car, because they've got two motors now for front regen and rear regen.
Yeah.
So they're adding a sort of mechanical rear brake that, when the regen doesn't work, will still definitely clasp the tire and just mechanically stop the car.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's
technical, but yeah, it's like a fail-safe kind of thing if something does go
excellent
wrong.
word.
But the problem is there have been some accidents. Where we had a big accident in testing, I think all 4 of the Jaguar powered cars didn't go out in the afternoon or morning. No, it was the rest of the morning session on day 2 or 3 because of that. So that is a big problem because of safety. We've seen big crashes in Formula E before. Eduardo Mortara in Saudi, was it Saudi Arabia? Mortara? Or no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Lynn.
It was in Riyadh. It's the second race in Riyadh in 2021. And because of that, Mercedes cars weren't able to qualify because at the end of the practice session, after the practice started, just the throttle stuck, the brakes didn't work.
Yeah, so
and there have been some private testing crashes prior to the Valencia test. Sam Bird had quite a big one for Jaguar, and Teo Porcher had one for, I want to say, Nissan or Mahindra.
Yeah, one of them two.
Say, but a few teams have been very critical of the state Formula E is attempting to start the season.
And then throw in reliability issues, which we saw a lot of in testing, just because stopping. I didn't get too much from the specifics of why, but it does feel a bit like, for those who are kind of more new to Formula E, if you were watching Formula 1 in 2014, it feels a bit like that, where there was a lot of people saying there's going to be lots of DNFs because of the new turbo hybrid engine they had then, and it's just going to be chaos. And it does feel a bit similar to me with that. Like, there are some teams, like the Maserati powered teams, are looking very good. They have had hardly any problems really, but a lot of the teams, they have had issues, and we saw this in the early days of Formula E as well, seasons 1, 2, and 3, where the cars would just stop in the race, and it almost came down to luck in a way. So you could be leading, and then you'd suddenly stop, and then there's 25 points gone. So I think we could be seeing a lot of that, especially in the early 4 or 5 races.
Yeah, there have been quite a few criticisms pointed at Formula E as a result of this from within the paddock. A lot of people aren't very happy that essentially they're starting the season with a brake problem on the car. The mechanical fail-safe brake won't be available for a couple of months, and the majority of the season is front-loaded. So the majority of the season is completed before a couple of months from now. So it's putting drivers in quite an unfortunate position. Mexico, at least, is a grade 1 circuit for the most part, so the runoff there is a bit more generous than most Formula E circuits. But street tracks, you look at some like
Saudi Arabia,
Riyadh, or somewhere Rome later down in the season. These are fast. Riyadh and Rome are fast tracks with walls right there, and they're fast in a Gen 2 car. And depending on how this tire becomes more knowledgeable, they will definitely find more out of it than they did in Valencia, particularly when it's in December of Valencia. If you're in the summer in Italy, you're going to have a lot more to know about on a tire, and it's just going to work a lot better. And that's going to be, and it could get to a stage where it's a bit touchy for this kind of thing. And Formula E are starting the season in that boat. And we don't want to doom monger too much, but personally, as a fan, I feel a bit concerned by it. And I think from what I hear from team members, and I think particularly what I've read from the race reporter Sam Smith has written about Mr. Mondlinger, the Porsche boss, has been very critical, very, very critical of what's gone on. So who knows what's going to happen?
I will say, I don't think it will be all doom and gloom. I hope where I trust that a lot of the problems will be solved. I can see the reliability being lessened over the season, really. And I think on the braking, I don't know, it's because it can happen at any time, can't it? It can happen in practice, qualifying, or the race. But I have faith that there won't be any incidents. But that's just me more hoping. But it isn't. Yeah, it's just difficult. Let's say, just because obviously it's going to come down to luck, and that's not how a championship should be. If if they're trying to be one of the biggest motorsport championships in the world, they shouldn't be having these problems, but they are, which isn't good because you shouldn't be hearing about these things literally a week before a new season.
It does depend on where the problems are. I think, like you were saying there, the Stellantis cars, Maserati and not Techeetah. I've already got it wrong. DS Penske have run pretty smoothly. The Nissan cars have run pretty smoothly, and the McLaren Nissan and just the Nissan EDAMs. So there could be an element that this is a problem for a Jaguar car, for instance, and the Envision cars are the ones who break down from the lead consistently, and then there's always a Maserati to pick up the pieces, hypothetically. So there are sides of it where the championship can come down to luck. If it's a generic Formula E issue, we've seen issues across championships before. Those of you who watched Formula 2 in 2018 will remember that they had to do rolling starts because the clutch didn't work, so you just had cars just stopped on the grid, and that was dangerous. So they brought in a quick fix, a quick fail-safe for that, which was the rolling start. They developed a new clutch, which they did. But if it's a problem with one team's reliability, then that's, from a competitive standpoint, that's obviously a lot better than to watch, but it's disappointing to watch. And as much as you expect teething problems, I think I still think even if you're a team who breaks down, you can point your finger at the Gen 3 process, of Gen 3 development process as a concept, rather than solely accept the blame yourself.
Yeah, there is an argument to say the season should have been delayed by a year. It hasn't, and we're in the situation we're in now. So it's going to be about who's going to deal with it best. And at the moment, it looks like Maserati, Nissan, Mahindra to some extent are looking pretty good. It's a shame. I always feel with a new era of any motorsport, any new regulations, I saw the same with WRC last year, not many people know about it. We're literally days away from the start for the first race of a brand new season, new regulations. It's going to be lighter, faster, more efficient car. Quality of the grid is amazing as well, keeps growing year on year. And there hasn't been much about it. I mean, yes, we're being negative now, but there's also a lot of positives there. And I do wish that was being pushed more, which we haven't seen, not just this year. Well, this year's only a few days, but like over the last 2 or 3 years, which is a massive shame as well for the championship. And I think that's where I feel from season 5 to 6 there was a big growth, but then since then, since COVID, really, it has plateaued, which is a big shame as well, because we should be hearing more about Formula E, in general.
There's you can sort of point to particular waypoints of Formula E life in the start of Gen 1 and start of Gen 2. Gen 1 Formula E was was on the back pages because of the big flip crash for Nick Heidfeld for the lead of the race at the end, right on the final corner of the race, that just meant that there were all eyes on Formula E. It didn't necessarily make people want to watch it, because, to be honest, Nico Prost's driving was pretty wrong, but that's a different story. Then you've got Gen 2 Mexico. You've got Lucas de Grassi overtaking at the line Pascal Wehrlein, and Pascal Wehrlein ran out of energy, which said exactly what Gen 2 was as a concept in terms of energy and regen and so on, and also was just exciting in grandstand. And that really then bookmarked Gen 2. So frankly, Formula E is in a nice new position to have a new slate, to have a big thing to shout about. There's just a big hope that the big thing to shout about isn't people kicking up a fuss about something to complain at, and is a cracking bit of driving and a cracking bit of action. And even if you have like a cool strategy race where someone conserves energy better than someone else, that's quite good. And that's some of the races that have worked really well. You look at the the second Riyadh race in season 7, where Sam Bird won for Jaguar with a good straight fight against Robin Freins in the Envision. And it was a good straight fight, and it was a really good little cracking fight. So that did really well for them to tie over Formula E to the next couple of rounds. So I think that's what they need, really. They need a good story.
I think the racing in Formula E will always be very good. Like, if there's not too many reliability issues, as long as the cars are safe, which I think they will be, that further down the line, the racing will always be good because of the nature of the cars. They can follow each other. They can rub a little bit, not too much this season because the front of the cars, from what I've been told, is very fragile, or more fragile than the Gen 2 car. But the racing will always be good, and it's always going to be competitive as well. It will be a surprise to some extent if one team does really dominate. I mean, look at the amount of, I think pretty much every season the title has gone down to the final race. It's just how many drivers are involved. So that it will always have that on its side, which is great. And from that perspective, you do question why isn't it more bigger? Because it's got, from the sporting perspective, which is what most fans watch for, it's got everything going for it. I mean, yes, it's still only 9 years old, that kind of thing. But yeah, it just doesn't seem as big as it could be going into a new era, which is a shame. But yeah, we're doing our best to promote it here.
We're doing our best. We love Formula E, and we want it to soar. We want it to do well, and hopefully, fingers crossed, Gen 3 can generate a few nice headlines for the start of the season, which can hook some people for later down the line. Gen 3 isn't the only change for Formula E this year. With Gen 3 comes, a good place to wipe the slate a little bit on a few rules, but the Gen 2 rules were pretty good when you think about attack mode. Attack mode has been altered a bit for Gen 3. Rather than having 2 4-minute blocks as a sort of standard, there will just be a 4-minute blanket for the race, and that can then be applied in different ways. It still has to be activated twice, so it keeps the strategy fair for the offline activation of attack mode. But it properly needs to be armed in the car, and then you can select as a driver how long of your 4-minute allocation you'll use in that stint of attack mode. So you can do a 1-minute push on attack mode, and then the next time you have to do 3 minutes, or 2 and 2, or 3 and 1, and so on, depending on where you are in the race. So it adds an interesting strategy, an interesting level of sort of how a car and how a driver and team are going to push in that phase of the race. So that will be very interesting to see in practice, because I don't know how you feel about it, Nigel, but to me, sort of speaking it out, it feels like putting on a qualifying tire for a few laps and seeing how hard you're going to push on that, because if this tire can go pretty well, then they can push really hard quite early. But it becomes a question of, do you save it or not? What would you?
Yeah, I think so. We see this in previous seasons as well. The drivers want to usually use attack mode early in the race. We very rarely see them leave it for the last few laps, because that's when the battery temperature is quite high, and I think that will still be the case this season as well. So I do feel we'll still see the drivers using it early on, and I think it will, obviously it depends on the scenario and that kind of thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see them use 2 and 2, or use the 3 minutes in the first bit of the race, and then just leave 1 or 2 minutes of attack mode for the second half or the middle of the race, perhaps. But I think just strategically, it is fascinating. It is pure. It's not gimmicky at all. We've got rid of fan boost as well. So anyone complaining about Formula E who says, "Oh, it's got fan boost," you can't complain about that anymore. We're going to have a great race.
Nothing anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I think there were a few times where the podium position changed and that kind of thing, which was a bit annoying. But
the worst time was when Pascal Wehrlein got a penalty for not using the fan boost at the right time, because he basically didn't get the advantage, so got penalised. Fantastic footage of Alejandro Agag getting absolutely infuriated by that.
Yeah, but yeah, there's no fan boost this season. The other thing I see people complain about Formula E is the tracks. For me, they're on the street circuits, so you get to see the drivers pushing to the limits. There's no need for track limits. You get to see them close to the walls, pushing hard. Yes, to save it in the braking zone, but in the actual corners, to get really close to the walls. And with a harder tyre, they can push in the corners all race, flat out pretty much, and slide as well. So from that kind of racing perspective, with the strategy element we're going to have now, with the tracks, we've got Brazil, India, South Africa coming to the calendar this season, Portland as well is the American race. It is all very, very good, as long as it's competitive, which I think it will be. So yeah, like I said earlier, I think the actual racing, as long as there's not too many reliability issues, will be very good.
Yes, I think we both agree that these cars are going to look really cool on street tracks and are going to look really cool side by side. And that's quite exciting. But it's who is side by side. Look at that segue that we're now going to talk about, because having had our Valencia testing, having had our man on the ground with Nigel, we've been able to actually get a relative competitive picture. You could suggest Valencia sometimes is touted as a completely random track for Formula E, but over the course of Gen 2, there were a few nuggets of information that you could take, and the fastest times did tend to translate pretty well into the earlier rounds, particularly with BMW usually being quite quick at the early rounds and quite good in Valencia. So maybe it's a Max Günther thing, because Max Günther top testing for Maserati, his new team. His team is only in out of circumstance, really, because Nick de Vries went to Formula One, and his Stellantis car mates, so the DS cars that run the same car as the Maserati due to automotive rules, life, due to that kind of thing, are Van Dorn and Jean-Luc Verne, who are pretty much equal, a tenth behind in the same car. And then Eder Mortara is ninth, but not a massive gap in terms of time off, a few tenths off. So that Stellantis car in the hands of four very good drivers, four drivers who have won races and fought for championships, basically. Not so much in Max Günther's case, but he has been in vague championship fights in Formula E. I think they're going to be the four front runners this year.
I agree. I think so. Maserati is basically the Venturi team. It's the same people. It's just got the Maserati brand, a bit more money. Gunter there now as well, alongside Mortara, who's been there for all his Formula E career, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has since season 3.
Yeah. So wow. Yeah. So I agree. I think they will be the front runners. They looked reliable. They had the pace. They did, I think, 597 laps off the top of my head from an article. I'm just going to look at Total Motorsport. Read it there. So they should be good. Obviously, it's only testing, and Valencia is a very different track to most of the Formula E tracks that we go to. So I think in Formula E, it's about who's most consistently at the front. And I think Maserati and DS, they're always going to be in the duels, or most of the time they'll be in the duels. They'll have very good race pace at most tracks. So that is what I think we're going to see this season. I think those cars will be towards the front, and then everyone else will kind of be a bit more inconsistent. So then we probably could have 3 or 4 drivers, Verne, Van Dorn, Gunter, and Mortara in the championship battle, I think.
A driver and a team which has popped up pretty well is the new McLaren team as well. They're now no longer the Mercedes championship juggernaut of recent years in Formula E. Mercedes have pulled out, but the team has continued as McLaren. The same manufacturer, same people in the team. Ian James is still the team principal. Jake Hughes has been promoted from reserve driver to race driver. René Rast has been brought, DTM legend René Rast really has been brought in to lead that team. And they've not looked shabby either in terms of pace. Neither has the Nissan team, but with the Nissan EDAM's works team with a bit more of a inexperienced lineup. Well, in terms of actually pretty similar when you think about it, with Norman Nato and Sasha Fenestras. But they've all been there or thereabouts as well, as have the Mahindra cars and Jaguar cars in terms of pace. So there's a lot going to be knocking on the back of DS and Maserati. Yeah. So if there is a slip up, there will be people to pounce, and there will be challenges, and there will be attempts to attack. So it's the classic sort of, we think we know what's going on, but also it's just going to be all over the shop. But it's the consistency of the top teams of high points that's going to work well for this. And the pace you can summon in the duels will be incredibly impressive.
I think McLaren are probably going to be the closest challengers. I think because René Rast on the first day in the press conference when he was speaking to the media, he already said, or he already admitted that he understood why Mercedes had won the last two Formula E drivers and teams championships with De Vries and Van Dorn.
And coming from Audi to say that says a lot.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first times, apart from the Porsche Super Cup, where Rast is not driving for an Audi car, basically. So for him to say that was quite something. Jake Hughes looked on the pace straight away. He's obviously had a lot of simulator work. He's been the sim driver for Formula E Mercedes over the last couple of years. So he's almost had the perfect run-in, a bit like Russell into Mercedes and F1, perfect run-in to Formula E, making his debut when there's new regulations always helps as well, as that levels the playing field. So I think McLaren are going to be very strong. And Rast, I mean, for me, in terms of motorsport over the last decade, he is a top driver. Like Porsche Super Cup, absolutely dominated, top GT driver. Formula E, he's very unfortunate not to get more seasons. He only had that one full season, didn't he, with Audi? And was that the COVID year? I think it was the COVID year.
Yeah, he came in. He came in for the Berlin Festival, replacing Daniel Abt, and got a podium. And then did the full season for Audi's last season and got a couple of podiums through there. But I thought was impressive to get onto the pace of such a comfortable Degrassi so quickly. Yeah. And what's forgotten about, based on where he finished that season, was that for the majority of that season, he was in Group 1 qualifying.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's a top driver. And Jake Hughes in F2 did quite well, actually, with Van Amersfoort, because they were a new team. He pulled out mid-season because presumably he knew that this Formula role was coming. So he's looking very good as well. So I think McLaren will be the strongest out of those teams we just mentioned. Interestingly, Mahindra, on the media day that was just before the last day, Degrassi and Rowland were kind of writing off their chances of winning, just winning races. But then the final day, they improved a lot. So I'm not sure if they were just saying that just to tell the press. But they were...
Well, it's weird because Freintz and Muller have also, who are driving for the Abt Mahindra team, the Mahindra customer team, have been quite low on their chances as well. They're sort of setting it up for a season 10 push a lot more.
Yeah, they were saying they were going to be in the midfield, but from the pace on the last day and reliability wise, they were not too bad. So they could be a surprise as well. And Rowland and Degrassi is a really strong lineup. Degrassi is obviously the most experienced driver in Formula E. He's on every single race, the only driver to do that. And Rowland, we saw couple of seasons ago in qualified, he was like an absolute demon over one lap. Incredible raw pace, such a great talent, which he's proven during his junior single C today. So they've got a great lineup. I'm pretty sure they will win races this year. It's just how many for me. I don't think they can quite challenge for the championship, but yeah, I'd say they look very strong. And then there's Jaguar, who at the moment don't look as strong as they have in more recent seasons. But again, I think they can come on because they've got that experience, kept the same driver lineup, kept the same team members. So I think they will come on as well. So there's really at least 5 or 6 teams who will be very, very competitive. This is going to come down to who can do it at the crucial moment. It's going to come down to tenths, hundredths of a second. So very exciting. But Maserati do have that slight advantage.
Yeah, I think we're both putting our hopes on Maserati. We're going to go for a few quick fire things now, because why wouldn't you? Drivers' champion, easy, big shot, go.
Jean-Eric Vergne.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to go Mortara.
He said he's been the almost guy.
He has. He's been second twice, hasn't he?
Yeah, second or third.
Yeah.
He had that big crash he hit Mitch Evans, who didn't get off the start line in Berlin a couple of years ago.
And had basically had an awful London and then just put himself out of the title race and then had a very good soul, but wasn't able to pull through with that.
Yeah, he led the championship at the halfway point, then went on a run of 4 or 5 races where he didn't score last year. So, yeah, Mortara's a great shot. But yeah, I've got a feeling Vergne, we haven't seen the best of him over the last few years.
Yeah.
DS Tajita, as it was called then when he was Antonio Felix da Costa's teammate. I don't think the car, maybe the slightly softer Michelin compound didn't really suit him, but I think this is suiting him. This harder tyre. We see because he drives in WEC in LMP2, and they've got very hard tyres there. So maybe it's a tyre thing for him. He likes this harder tyre because he can, the way he works, his driving style.
Hypercar now, Porsche, Peugeot.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, teams champion.
DS Penske.
I agree.
I'm gonna have to be boring. Yeah.
Yeah, Van Dorn and Verne is the closest you'll get to a superstar lineup in Formula E. It's basically the step up on Da Costa and Verne that they had last couple of seasons, in my opinion.
Do you think this is the strongest lineup ever we've seen in Formula E? Van Dorn and Verne.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of one. Or I was trying to think of one. I couldn't.
I think if you'd asked me a couple of seasons ago, I would have said Bird and Evans, but Bird's just been disappointing recently. So he's got a big year ahead of him. But I do think Da Costa and Wehrlein is a cracking lineup as well.
Yes.
I would rank the top 3 lineups in Formula E at the moment: DS Penske, Porsche, and then Maserati. Those would be my top 3.
I think I'd agree. I'd maybe have Mahindra in third.
Actually, yeah, Mahindra, very good call. Actually, Mahindra. Yes,
but that just shows the quality of the grid, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, they've all come from different series. Like Nick Cassidy's come from Japan. Andre Lotterer raced everything: WEC, Super Formula, Super GT,
F1,
that little race in F1. Yeah, Caterham, he did only one lap, unfortunately. But
he qualified a second ahead of Marcus Ericsson. Just remember that.
I really do think the quality of this grid is just as good as F1.
Roland. Goodness me. Andretti.
Oh, yeah.
Dennis and Lotterer.
Yeah.
Porsche power unit as well. I reckon they're going to be pretty handy.
I think Lotterer...
It's that sort of 4th to 7th mix that we've been talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Lotterer's just going to lack a couple of attempts to me over there. I mean, Dennis, the form he showed at the end of last season was very good. If he can continue that into this year, he could be winning races as well. Lotterer, not too sure. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be in Formula E, but I just don't think he's quite in that elite bracket of drivers.
They both have a bit of flair, and I think the Gen 3 car might suit that. But that's pure speculation. Well, it's not actually. It's based on what we were saying about the tyre. But yeah. Okay, right. Back to the quickfire because that was a long answer. Who's going to win the first race? Mexico.
First race, Mexico. I'm going to say Degrassi. Why not?
Ooh, that's fun.
Because Mexico and Degrassi.
It goes well, doesn't it? I'm going to say Gunter.
Yeah.
I've been burned before putting my eggs in the Gunter basket because I tipped him for a lot of championships in Gen 2 and he let me down.
He's still the youngest driver to win a race, I think. That one in Santiago was a brilliant race. That was one of the best races that was one of the best performances I've seen.
That win, his New York win the year later was excellent as well. And the Berlin win he had in end of season 6 was also very good. His 3 wins, I think they've all been very good wins.
Yeah.
So I think he needs to summon a bit more of that because his Nissan year was frankly quite disappointing, but I do think this Maserati chance is very good for him.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I had another quick fire question, but I've forgotten it. What's going to be the best race?
Like in terms of the actual race or just the venue and everything, or
I think do the former because I think for venue in that it would probably be London or Berlin.
Yeah, the drivers are saying London was the best.
Yeah,
and me and you went last year, and it was
brilliant.
Well.
Yeah.
For the racing, I'm always interested in the new tracks because I always think new tracks are just interested in general because it can change things. You can say it levels the playing field. So I'll just say Rio. I hope there's loads of Degrassi fans and that kind of thing, and then Degrassi's on the podium. I think that would be quite nice.
You mean Sao Paulo?
Sorry, Sao Paulo, not Rio. Yeah.
No, I was going to say Sao Paulo as well because I just thought this is a race that could just pop off and be ridiculous.
And they've been pushing for that for a long time for you to go to Brazil as well.
I can see it being a race a lot of drivers would want to win. So I can see that going very nicely. We're agreeing again on things. Awkward.
With Formula E, we do generally agree on.
Yeah, we do.
Agree on, don't we?
We get a bit more touchy on our Formula One differences, but Formula E, I don't know. Formula E, the band of brothers has to stick together. People who like Formula E. Do you have any quick fire questions, Nigel? This is a quick fire question in itself.
Let me think of one. How many drivers will be involved in the title fight, like mathematically going into the final race? Do you think we're going to see more or less compared to previous years?
I think we'll have three drivers. Okay. I think the duels limits it to not being the 10 people you have going into the final round. Sometimes I think it's going to be actually relatively similar to the drivers we've had in recent years with Van Dorn and Vernon Multara or someone like that. That's where I'd put my money now. I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Verlano da Costa is up there as well, just because they're canny, brilliant operators and they're just getting better and better. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's more, but I'm going to hedge my bets and say 3.
I think the last point I wanted to make on in terms of the racing is with the laps format, the drivers they did a mock race in Valencia. Jake Hughes won it actually, and I think René Rast was third, so it was a 1-3-4 McLaren. But they were saying they didn't have to save much energy at all, which is some drivers liked it, some didn't. Again, it depends on if you want to see more overtakes, you need more saving because then you see bigger differences. And for me, that's what I hope to see. So I hope in the early races, the FIA can get it right and have enough laps so that drivers there's an element of energy saving and we get better racing. Because if it is just flat out, we will just get a train for most of the race, which is what we've got in the mock race in Valencia. So that's something I'm going to be looking out for in the first few races.
I would say a mock race in Valencia isn't anything that should be read into at all.
Yeah.
Because A, it's in Valencia, but B, with a mock race, you're just going to do your own testing program, but just with another car behind you. And I think
there was a safety car as well at one point.
It's good for the systems. It's more for Formula E than for the Formula E teams and drivers. But I think at least for the newer drivers in a team like Rast or Hughes, it's a good time to actually put them in that position, which is why they're sort of probably pushing a bit more. So I wouldn't take too much from that, but it's a good, cool thing that they do with their systems, and it hopefully leaves them in a good place going into Mexico from the operations side. Only the issues, obviously, we talked about with Gen 3 earlier, will be there, but like that race can carry on. You can have a couple of cars going into the garage, but that's kind of normal for a test race. And we'll have to see what happens with Gen 3 Formula E season 9. It's still a world championship, in case you forgot. So we're going to have a new Formula E world champion at the end of July in London. Is going to race through, but Saturday, the 14th of January, will be round 1, Mexico City. It's going to be run by Degrassi or Gunter, because we've decided that. Then there's a couple of weeks, then we've got a double header in Diriyah. Then we go to India, Cape Town, Sao Paulo, double header Berlin, Monaco, double header in Jakarta, which was a huge race last year. Huge. That's going to be a fan favorite race for a lot of people, I reckon, this year. Portland, which will be odd, double header Rome, and finale double header in London in the end of July.
And I should hopefully be at least half of those races. Probably.
That's insane.
Definitely the European, definitely the European ones, which I think there's 7 out of the 16. Then
I'm going to try and go to a few out of my own pocket. And see what I can do with those. We'll try and bring you more Formula E episodes throughout the year. It's going to be easier at the start of the year when there's not so much Formula 1 to talk about. It's going to be difficult when there are Formula 1 and Formula E clashes and Nigel's in India or something. But we'll try and do a few more of these because, frankly, I've really enjoyed this because I just love talking about Formula E. And hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, Nigel. Hopefully.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing, Freddie, because I forgot to say it at the start of this podcast and forgot to say it in the last podcast as well.
Yes.
But there was some sad news last week that Ken Block sadly passed away at the age of 55, which is Yeah, it was just a massive surprise, unfortunately, because he had a snowmobile accident when he was filming. But he is, I don't like using the word legend a lot, but he is a
Oh, yes,
legend.
he is.
A pioneer is the word I'd use for modern off-road racing. And just, he's helped so many series like Extreme E, the Rallycross, Nitro, and World RX. He's played a part as well. Just the technology, making off-road cool, essentially, with his
Yeah.
Gymkhana stuff, and which have, I think, like over 730 million views in total, which for off-road or even for motorsport is just unbelievable. Just the car control, the way he felt the engine, the chassis, the tires, everything. It's something you can't teach, but he clearly had that talent from such a young age. So yeah, I just want to pay tribute to that, because the flamboyance that he had, and then he wasn't too bad when he raced in the championships as well, considering he was doing so many off-track stuff and wasn't just focusing on a championship. So just an incredible character, and just a sad miss that he's gone.
He's an absolute superstar, and I think I speak for you and for most people I know that it definitely had an empty feeling, and still doesn't really feel true in the worst possible way. And yeah, Ken Block is is a legend in my opinion. I know it's an overused term, and like you say, but for me, he is a legend. He is the driver for this style, and that's the status he deserves, and the status he will have for all of us as we go forward as well. And it's tremendously sad news. So yeah, well said, Nigel. That wraps up our Formula E preview episode really there. Saturday, the 14th of January, go to Formula E website to sort of find out where to watch it and how to watch it, because it's Formula E, so it's all over the place.
It'll be on Discovery Plus. I have to say that's because of my job.
Oh yeah, well there we go. Watch it on Discovery Plus, because Nigel gets paid by them. But also I'll probably watch it on Channel 4.
Yes. That's an alternative option. Yes.
Yes. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. This has gone on for longer than we thought, but that's good, because Formula E is back, and we're happy about it. And enjoy. Have a great time, and see you again soon, guys. Goodbye.